Thank you so much, Stefano, for a splendid introduction into a new paradigm for economics. I ask people to raise their hand who want to ask questions. Janne was the first who wanted to ask, and I see now Douglas.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Janne first.
Ladies first. I am, of course, very much in agreement with what you say as is the program of the civil economy. However, there is very little in evidence of this kind of thinking among politicians in Europe and among, I think, economists as a profession. To take one example of the, should one say, unfair character of the global market or even the internal market of the EU, when a doctor from Poland or Hungary goes to Western Europe, he or she earns 10 times precisely more than at home. So this is individually rational. This is from the point of view of the human person as a citizen with an obligation to build his or her own society. This is unethical. Another example, economic migration, which is, has enormous proportions. Paul Collier's work on why this happens, very interesting and very well documented also from other sources, that it is individually rational to pay up 9,000 or 6,000 euros to get to Europe, but it is disastrous for the society that one leaves. So it is highly unethical from a global, not a global, from a societal or even Catholic point of view regarding the human person. And also the economics of this, in a way, remain very unethical, unfair, because why should a European worker compete against a Chinese worker or a Hungarian worker, so to speak? So there are such glaring ethical problems with large implications for the common good or the lack thereof in the current economic system. But why isn't there much more engagement in a criticism of this? For instance, concretely, the internal market of the EU. Where are the economists? Do we have to go back to protectionist economists, infant industry, Friedrich List, and so on? Do we have to go back, or are there contemporary economists who say we have to modify the free market, extremely free market economy now, in order for there to be a better result?
Thank you. You are perfectly right that there is not enough evidence, but there is a reason for that. Because in recent times, the first time that the notion of civil economy paradigm was started was 24 years ago. Because until the end of the 18th century, that was the dominant paradigm in economics. Adam Smith knew it, and he adopted it. But most economists do not know that because they do not read the text. Because if you take the text by Antonio Genovesi, which was published 30 years before the famous text by Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, who spent 2 years in Paris, he knew the work of Genovesi. And if you bring the two books, you will see there is many similarities, and in many cases, etc. But what happened is that already at the beginning of the 19th century, the political economy paradigm became dominant over the civil economy paradigm. And we know the historical reason for that, because the Industrial Revolution in England required the political economy. Why? Because the difference is the anthropological assumption. What is the anthropological assumption of political economy? Homo economicus. Who is the Homo economicus? Hobbes. Homo homini lupus. Every man is a wolf against the other. What is the anthropological assumption of a civil economy that you can read in the book by Genovesi? Homo homini natura amicus, which means every man is by nature a friend to another man. And these are two completely different. If I start from the assumption that you are a wolf, I have only one option, to defend myself. Because you might kill me, you might rob me, etc. And all political economic theory was based on that assumption. Of course, with some exceptions. For instance, Karl Marx not accept. But as you know, Marxism it's out of the game. And also, Keynes himself did not accept. Even John Stuart Mill modified. But the fact was the mainstream of economic discourse is based on that. So that is why only in recent times this alternative has emerged. Why? Because confronting the new challenges, we observe that the political economy is unable to provide a solution. It's unable. Because if it could provide, it would have already done. Because that was the dominant paradigm for more than 2 centuries. Now, we are able to denounce what is going wrong. But when you, from the diagnosis, you move to the therapy, because we have to change the foundations. It's not enough to increase the state intervention. You have to change the anthropological foundation and the telos, which means the goal. Because for political economy, the telos is maximizing GDP. But GDP is total good, not the common good. And that is, but we observe that in the last, particularly in political theory, there are many scholars who are moving this, and also in sociology. I mean, what we heard before from Paolo Donati on the sociological front, it's a sort of a parallel to what. In other words, in the social sciences, there is, in this period, historical period, a completely new movement. If you talk with the young scholars, you will realize in political science, sociology, and in economics. And so, I am optimistic.
Thank you, Stefano. Douglas, please. Now it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Stefano. So I guess I have 2 questions now. The first question is, I understand your distinction between circular
Subsidiarity, yeah.
sociality and horizontal, subsidiarity and horizontal, but it would be helpful to have an example of the state working with corporations and nonprofits. That's my first question, if you could provide that. And second is, I guess in your answer to Jen, is that it sounds like, I'm not sure that ideas lie behind all this, rather than more material structures. So if you could speak to that as well.
Thank you. You are right. It's true. The point is that, in other words, vertical subsidiarity is basically devolution. The central state transfer to the local authorities, still public, parts, for instance, to the regions to municipalities, etc. And that is good in itself. It's not bad. But it's not a subsidiarity in the sense we were talking in these days. Horizontal subsidiarity means that the state or the public authority says to a civil society organization, you organize that particular services according to your, let's say, instinct or your, let's say, mission. But that, again, is good. What is the problem? That horizontal subsidiarity does not guarantee universalism. That is the point. So my question is, if you want to stick to universalism, we are talking of welfare services, that every person, every city is entitled to have access to certain basic services, the mere horizontal subsidiarity does not guarantee that. It guarantees, of course, expression. The idea of circular subsidiarity is to put in interrelations among themselves the 3 elements, namely public authorities, the business community, and civil society organizations. And that, if you ask me, is that experience, there are any, yes, there are many, particularly in Europe. Of course, they are recent. And I can quote examples from different countries, from Italy, France, as well as England, Germany, etc. Because the idea is that none of the 3 entities, state, business community, and civil society organization, by itself is capable or has the possibility of coping with the problem. Of course, that is, in my opinion, the venue towards a really participatory society. When you put around the table the 3 representatives of the 3 spheres, and on the basis of certain rules, of course, And when you do that, you will see the difference. Because people learn to respect the other opinion, and the one who has more reasons to put forward is the one who obtains the result. On the other hand, in the traditional, let's say, horizontal subsidiarity, it is the public entity which decides you can do that, you should do that. The only liberty is to organize the service according to, but the one fixing the rules is the public authority. On the other hand, in my opinion, the procedures themselves should be the result of a common dialogue between the three. Because each one of the three spheres has a specific capability which is not shared by the other two.
Thank you very much. Juan, please.
Thank you, Stefano, for your very interesting and, I would say, polemic thesis. I have two questions. First, what you think are the ways to incarnate in society the idea of civil economy or civil society? And you see this as a bottom-up task or a top-down task? I mean, which are the ones that eventually could develop this idea and put it more in practice than is nowadays? And the second is some doubt, because my perception is that in many workplaces, what you call civil economy eventually takes place. I mean, you have a lot of firms and workplaces in which people have many other gratifications in addition to the salary or the wage, because it's a constructive work, they work together, they have good relationships, etc. And on the contrary, my perception is that new generations perhaps are much more skeptical and give just an instrumental value to the workplaces and the professional development. If you talk with human resources people from firms, they will say that it's very difficult to maintain them. Why? Because they give, I insist, just an instrumental value to the workplace and to the professional development. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Juan. Yes, you're right. The first question, I would stress the role of culture. That is the point. In other words, if you take any textbook of economics in the world, not the recent ones, but up to 10, 15 years ago, go and read the analytic index. If you are able to find words such as reciprocity, such as common good, such as non-instrumental rationality, you win the bet. Now, I found that it's something which should, if you have a consensus, you should react to that. Because I do not claim that one should believe to the civil economy. Of course not. But you have to mention that, leaving people free to choose. In other words, when as a professor teacher, I teach both the political economy paradigm and the civil economy paradigm. And I noticed that the young people, they make their own considerations. Some might say, I prefer the political economy because I believe in homo economicus and I like homo economicus. Okay, nobody prevents it. But there are other people who say, why professors, scholars do not mention that? Answer this question. Is that fair when you know that until for centuries, there is a huge literature which was put aside. That is not fair if you believe in justice. or in truth. So that is, but it is true that in the last 10, 15 years, for instance, recently, a book by Samuel Bowles, who is an American, the title is Moral Economy. Go and read it. I was surprised. He's an American economist, rather known, and he's much more polemic against his fellow friends. He's accusing them of not mentioning the truth, not obliging the truth. You have to speak the truth and leave people freely to choose. Now, what you said, Juan, is correct. I mentioned Bowles, but I could have mentioned Amartya Sen. Actually, Amartya Sen was the first already in his ethics and economics. And Rational Fools, that is the title of his famous article, who obtained to him the Nobel Prize. Rational Fools, when he says the rational economic paradigm, the official one, is a paradigm for fool people. And he demonstrated, and nobody objected to that, because he was right. So that is what I am claiming. I am claiming for a freedom, real freedom of speech, real freedom of culture, which not yet has been achieved, because, you see, if you propose a research line in those directions, you will never get them financed. And that is intolerable, because that is discrimination. And that is the point. You can't discriminate saying because it's not mainstream. So what? The other point, what you said, it's correct. You mentioned corporate welfare. That is true. I agree with you. And in fact, as I mentioned before, for instance, in America, 10 years ago, they invented the B Corp, which means benefit corporation. Italy was the second country in the world introducing, with the law, a benefit corporation. We call it differently, but the same. Now, a benefit corporation is no longer a capitalistic corporation. And that is America. It's a corporation which achieves two objectives. One, profits, to guarantee sustainability. The other one, what they call social utility, and which is different from corporate philanthropy, because corporate philanthropy always existed and will always exist. But the benefit corporation is not a corporation which gives money as a philanthropy, but operates using its expertise, know-how, in order to generate social benefit. Now, France is doing a similar, Germany, etc. Now, in the States, there are already 2,000 firms. Some of them are even big ones, who have adopted the benefit corporation. Now, why is that so? And until a few decades ago, nobody was thinking those things. That means that things are changing. And another example, what you said, corporate welfare. Why today many corporations are not only interested in being fair in the wage policy, etc., but they also offer other things in order to entertain and increase the loyalty of their workers. A recent, for instance, paper on the Harvard Business Review has introduced the notion of toxic worker, saying that today the main problem in our, let's say, Western-type companies is that the workers they feel themselves alienated, not exploited, but alienated. And so they become toxic. And in this paper, we published in the two issues ago of the Harvard Business Review, they have quantified that the cost of a toxic work is $13,000 per year per toxic work. Now, these are all signs indicating that we are on the verge of a major change of paradigm. And that, in my opinion, it's the point where the civil economy perspective is getting ground. Because the basic idea, and we should never forget, that the market economy is the result of the Franciscan school of thought. Because we have to state that. Market economy was not born in the 18th century. Was born in the 15th century, at the time of humanism. And if you read the books, Schumpeter was not a believer. In his famous book, he said that the most important book before Adam Smith of economics was the one by Antonino da Firenze, who was the bishop of Florence. And it's a book of economics. It was published in 1454, etc., with many other indications. So we need today to, because the crisis is biting, and is biting very acidly, we have to go back to the cultural roots of the market. Otherwise, the risk is the market economy might destroy itself.
Thank you, Stefano. I would ask, since we have quite a lot of people on the list, to try to bridge a little bit questions and answers.
So let us collect the question. Let us collect.
So we collect questions.
Yes.
Rocco, please.
First question, why do you make so many American examples? We have in Italy, in our history, in recent history, very good examples of the way in which civil economy works. Take the distretti industriali, for instance. That is, the cooperation between the city, the local communities, and the firm for a purpose of common good. The cooperation among firms who are in competition with one another, but at the same time gather with one another in order to promote the common good. I say this only to make it clear, it is not just theory. There is a spontaneous praxis that goes together with this theory. Second question, what is the proper place in traditional Christian social doctrine to insert this idea of civil economy? I think the idea of participation, because participation is the point in which you go beyond the mere idea of solidarity to fraternity. And third, why only the Franciscans? There are also the Jesuits. Why are the Jesuits so important? Because through the Jesuits, you can make a connection also to Latin America and to the struggle for human rights in Latin America and to the, well, sometimes confused, but full of confused idea of a new kind of economic organization, very often confused, but also promising for the future of this important part of mankind.
Thanks.
Excellence, l'archevêque Roland.
Thank you very much. Professor Zamagni, you develop a new concept of circular subsidiarity. At the end, I'm asking myself if it is still subsidiarity as it has developed in the traditional social doctrine of the church. Because you say you have three bodies, the triangle, the social triangle, government, corporate sphere, civil society. Okay, but as far as I know, the idea of subsidiarity has been developed in the homogeneous sphere of public authority, And if you mix the three spheres, they have to mix, obviously, in some way. But is it still subsidiarity? Should we not find another concept? Because circular subsidiarity, I think subsidiarity was vertical. And now we have another way to develop this concept, but in my opinion, subsidiarity only develops in a homogeneous sphere. Either corporate, either public authority, either civil society. But when you mix the three of them, maybe you have another concept to develop. Excuse me.
Thank you.
If I may ask now Russell to ask his question, and then Stefano can answer.
Really, Stefano, just a brief footnote to Archbishop Minaroth's comment. By the way, I like the circular, and I don't think it's a different concept, but I'm somewhat suspicious of what's being mixed here, because the civil sphere, and you call them spheres, it's interesting, the civil sphere and the business spheres are not necessarily societies and certainly not communities. I mean, in using Old Latin, this is an universitas rerum, an organization of things, or to quote Cicero, these are the stones, not the souls, because it's an organization of instruments. So you have one entity, which really is a society, political society, and two others that look to me like organizations mainly of things. But second part of that, and among civil and business, It's hard to tell the difference. The largest energy corporation in my home state of Oklahoma, which doesn't do energy at small levels, okay? The wealthiest energy company in Oklahoma has only half the capital of Harvard University. Now, and I can guarantee you that Harvard acts more like Chesapeake than Chesapeake acts like Harvard. And they use the same business plans. And by the way, they all went to the same schools. So I'm worried about the sectors descriptively. I'm not worried about what you call the political. And by the way, I'm open to the circular, that a more horizontal sharing, or you used horizontal in a different way. I call it cybernetical sharing. But those two other spheres, not communities, and B, not very different from each other because they're all based in the same business model you're critiquing.
Stefano, se vuoi rispondere.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Rocco, yes, you're right. I didn't mention industrial districts, but I could have mentioned also the emergence of the movement of saving banks who were non-profit organizations. Most people today have forgotten, even in Italy. But you see, we have Luigi Einaudi, who was the governor of the Bank of Italy and then president of the Italian Republic, who in a famous, he was liberal, one of the highest figures of liberalism, he wrote that a bank should be non-profit firm. In other words, because a bank should not pursue the objective. And that was written by a liberal. And in fact, he was drawing on the experience of the saving banks, which are the rural banks, what is called credit union, etc. So in reality, many expressions of what I call in practice civil society organizations exist. The point is that I had no time to illustrate, but there is a huge literature already on that. On the other element, what you said about the Jesuits, I agree with you, but the Jesuits, they came after the Franciscans. And in fact, they took over from the Franciscans. In particular, Bonaventura da Bagnoregio take all the writing on the usury, the legitimation of the rate of interest, etc., etc. What you said about the proper place within the social doctrine of the church, let me answer this way. As you know, any model of social order, whatever, is based on three principles. The principle of exchange of equivalents, the principle of redistribution, and the principle of reciprocity. Now, the political economy paradigm has forgotten the third one. Now, the civil economy tries to put together the three, considering all the three. Because the exchange of equivalents, everybody knows what does it mean. If you want this, you have to give me what is called the market price. If you do not pay to me the market price, I will not give you this subject. The principle of redistribution, again, everybody understands. Redistribution from the higher level to the lower level, from the government to the people, etc., etc. But there is a third principle which is important to maintain an equilibrium, a social equilibrium in our society. That is the principle of reciprocity. So what the political economy paradigm has done has been to exclude altogether the principle of reciprocity. Now, the attempt today is to create a sort of organizational setup, institutional setup, allowing the three principles to operate hand to hand, without exclusion, and without imposing anything to anybody else. Now, in this sense, I answer to Bishop Minarat and to Russell, and their questions are connected. I didn't say that the circular subsidiarity, it's a new concept. It's just a version of the principle of subsidiarity. And circular subsidiarity does not substitute horizontal and vertical. Of course, they remain. But it has to be applied in a particular area, namely the area of the welfare services. That is important to keep in mind. I didn't generalize circular subsidiarity to everywhere. I was talking of reforming a welfare system. In that sense, that I remind that to Russell, we should know that the first formulation of the principle of subsidiarity in the modern sense goes back to Althusius. Althusius, who was a German philosopher, and it's a fascinating, that was the year 1615. Of course, it was put into practice even before, but I say the formulation, I would say the philosophical formulation, goes back to Louis Althusius. And it's fascinating to see, to read how he justified this principle. He justified the principle of subsidiarity on the basis of freedom, not in the basis of efficiency, of social consideration, but freedom. Because that was the period when we had emperors, we had autocratic states. So Althusius said, he was asking the prince, in metaphorical sense, to allow to people living in the society certain areas where they can organize themselves. But the main reason was what we would call nowadays positive freedom, etc. Over time, we have lost that interpretation, and we are using even nowadays subsidiarity as an instrumental in order to cope with the necessities of the market, both market failures and the government failures. In fact, certain of my colleagues, they said, if we could live in a world where markets were perfect and the government were perfectly functioning with no corruption, etc., we would not need the principle of subsidiarity. My answer is no, because the principle of subsidiarity is always necessary if we believe in the notion of positive freedom.
Thank you, Stefano. And now the last question, Lubomir Lchok, please. And be short, please, because we would like to soon begin with the next lecture.
You have arrived.
Yeah, I recommend to postpone my question, my point to general discussion.
Yes.